We often hear this, right? That Congress is broken, institutionally weak, just totally overshadowed by the presidency. But I have to ask you directly, is Congress really weak by design, or is it maybe just choosing not to fight, choosing not to use the power it has?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it really cuts to the heart of the book we're looking at today. Josh Chafetz's Congress's Constitution, Legislative Authority, and the Separation of Powers. It's a work that, honestly, challenges a lot of the standard thinking in Washington.
Right. And today we're going beyond just summarizing his arguments. Enjoy a bold new take on book coverage with this extended analysis. It's more than just a summary, though. We have that, too. This feature looks at how Chafetz shapes his argument, how he builds influence, and, frankly, how he earns or maybe loses your trust.
The idea is to give you the tools to read with sharper insight, more discernment. Should you read this book, well, this analysis should definitely help you decide.
It's also really useful for aspiring readers, I think, to see how arguments get constructed. And hey, if you find this expanded format valuable, we'd genuinely love to hear from you. Your feedback helps guide what we do next.
And, just a note, you are experiencing a unique two-host AI conversation powered by Google's NotebookLM, designed for, well, deeper and more dynamic book analysis.
Okay, let's unpack this. Chafetz published this when exactly? Because the context feels really important here. There was already a lot of debate about executive power, polarization.
That's right. It wasn't written in an academic vacuum. It came out right in the middle of this really intense public discussion about separation of powers. This was during a time of, let's say, perceived executive growth, executive aggrandizement.
So the feeling was that the White House was driving everything.
Pretty much. Congress often seemed like it was just reacting, not really setting the agenda. And this book dives right into those fundamental questions about Congress's relevance in the modern era. It's almost telling folks on the Hill and academics, stop complaining about weakness. Maybe start using the tools you actually have.
That definitely makes the subject feel urgent. So his core argument is basically, Congress, you're not weak, you're just not using your arsenal.
That's the crux of it. His thesis is pretty straightforward, but also quite profound. Congress has a much richer, more diverse set of constitutional tools than people generally think. Any current weakness, that's down to political timidity, he argues, not some inherent institutional flaw.
Okay, so the purpose is kind of twofold. Inform people about these tools, but also persuade Congress itself, staffers, members, that they can be stronger.
Precisely. It's about shifting the mindset from perceived limitations to actual capabilities.
But if these powerful tools exist, why the hesitation? It seems like he needs to really lay out what these powers are before he can convince anyone to use them.
He does exactly that. And the way he organizes it is key to his logical structure, I think. He systematically breaks down Congress's power into two main types: hard powers, which are coercive, and soft powers, which are more about internal functioning and influence.
Okay, hard powers. Those sound like the big guns. He mentions the power of the purse, which most people know about, controlling the money, but also the power of contempt. Can you expand on that? Because contempt of Congress sounds legalistic, but Chafetz sees it as a real constitutional weapon.
Oh, absolutely. The purse strings are obviously vital. But contempt, that's Congress's inherent power to investigate and compel people to cooperate. This goes way back, even to 17th century British Parliament.
Yeah.
If someone, say, ignores a subpoena from a committee investigating something important, Congress historically had, and Chafetz argues still has, the constitutional authority to actually detain that person itself, to compel them to testify or hand over documents. It's essentially Congress acting as its own enforcement mechanism.
Wait, hold on. Congress can actually detain someone, like lock them up. That seems huge. We never hear about that. It's always criminal referrals to the Justice Department, which often just fizzle out.
Exactly. And that's Chafetz's point. These hard powers are, as he calls them, blunt instruments. They're powerful, yes, but they involve direct confrontation, high political stakes, maybe even constitutional crises.
So modern Congresses avoid them. Too risky.
Often, yes. It seems easier, politically safer, to just not use them, to take the path of least resistance.
This is where the soft powers come in, then, because these sound less confrontational. Things like speech and debate protections, internal discipline, rulemaking.
Yes, and these are critical in his view. Soft powers don't necessarily pit Congress against the executive branch.
Yeah.
They're about Congress strengthening itself internally. Think about rulemaking, for example.
Like the filibuster rules or committee procedures.
Exactly. How Congress conducts oversight, how it handles ethics, how it disciplines its own members. Chafetz argues that if Congress used these internal tools more effectively, enforced stronger discipline, reformed its own rules, strategically, it would become a much more functional and therefore powerful body, better able to stand up to the other branches when needed.
Okay, this is a pretty bold argument. To make it stick, he needs serious credibility. Let's talk about his ethos. Being a Cornell law professor helps, obviously, but an argument this big needs more than just credentials.
That's very true. And he builds that credibility meticulously. It's not just the title, it's the depth of the scholarship. He traces the history of these powers back for centuries, literally. He's citing legal sources, historical examples from 17th century Britain Parliament, our Congress's ancestor, right up to very specific modern political fights.
So he's showing these powers aren't just theoretical legal ideas, they have a long track record.
Precisely. He's grounding them in centuries of actual practice and constitutional development. It shows they've been tested.
And that historical weight must influence his tone. How would you describe it? Is it aggressive? Academic?
It's definitely scholarly, but I'd say the dominant tone is measured and precise. It's not a fiery political pamphlet. It's a careful, almost clinical diagnosis of institutional power.
Which probably makes the argument more persuasive in some ways.
I think so. That measured tone enhances the seriousness of his claims.
No.
And importantly, while the subject matter is complex, his writing style keeps it accessible. You don't need a law degree to follow the core arguments.
So the tone isn't just informative, it's part of the persuasion strategy. Trying to get people inside Congress and those who watch it to think differently. Less about complaining, more about acting.
Absolutely. The purpose feels very much geared towards prompting institutional self-reflection, maybe even action.
In the way he builds that argument, the logical structure, the logo seems central.
It's the backbone, really. He doesn't just state his thesis, he constructs it layer by layer. Every claim about a specific power is backed up with historical examples, legal precedent, case studies. It's a very robust, multifaceted case he's building.
And the organization helps there too, right? It's not just a random collection of powers, giving each hard and soft power its own chapter, exploring its history and then its modern potential. That creates a very clear pathway through the argument.
Definitely. That structure reinforces the idea that these are distinct but interconnected tools ready to be used.
Now, you said the tone is mostly analytical, but is there any appeal to emotion, to pathos here?
Subtly, yes. It's not overt. But when Chafetz discusses the consequences of Congress not using its power, the potential imbalance in the constitutional system, the erosion of legislative relevance, he taps into a sense of civic concern.
Ah, so it's an appeal to responsibility.
Exactly. He evokes this sense of urgency, appealing to the readers, especially the engaged citizens or the policymakers' concern for constitutional balance. He's implicitly asking, do you want a system where one branch dominates because the other chooses not to compete? That carries a certain emotional weight for those who care about checks and balances.
That makes sense. It engages you intellectually with the history and logic, but also motivates you with a sense of, well, civic duty.
Precisely put.
We're going to pause briefly. We'll be right back with more analysis. But first, just a quick mention of Mindful Moments. That's our YouTube channel, offering AI book analysis, summaries, and critiques, all aimed at inspiring reflection and rational thought. Check it out.
And we're back. We were just talking about the logical and emotional appeals in Chafetz's book. Let's dig a bit deeper now into some of the specific rhetorical techniques he uses to make his case. One thing that jumped out at me was his use of historical comparison juxtaposition. Yes, that's a really effective strategy he employs quite often. He'll describe a moment in the past where Congress was, shall we say, much more assertive, maybe using its contempt power forcefully, or really leveraging the power of the purse during a conflict with the president.
Right, like maybe Watergate-era investigations?
Could be, or even earlier examples. And then he contrasts that historical assertiveness with, well, with contemporary examples where Congress seems much more hesitant or passive in similar situations.
So the contrast itself makes the argument. The Constitution hasn't fundamentally changed in these areas, but the willingness of Congress to act has.
Exactly. It highlights that institutional strength isn't just about the written rules. It's deeply affected by political context and, crucially, by the choices legislators make. It implicitly asks the modern Congress, why the difference? Why aren't you using the tools previous generations did?
It really forces you to confront that question of choice versus design.
It does.
And to make these constitutional ideas less abstract, he uses analogies and specific examples. You mentioned the blunt instruments idea earlier. I also like his overall analogy of Congress having a toolbox.
Yeah, the toolbox metaphor works well, doesn't it? It makes these varied powers, some big, some small, some internal, some external, feel like concrete options that Congress can choose from depending on the task at hand, like picking a specific wrench or hammer for a specific job.
It makes it feel more practical, less like just high-level legal theory.
And the specific historical episodes he details do the same thing. He doesn't just say Congress has the power of contempt. He might describe a specific instance where it was used or debated or failed. That makes the abstract principle much more tangible for the reader.
So, stepping back and evaluating, how effective is the book overall? Does he succeed in making his case that Congress chooses its weakness?
I think he makes a very persuasive case, yes. He successfully challenges that dominant narrative of an inevitably weak, declining Congress. The sheer weight of historical evidence and legal analysis he brings forward is hard to ignore.
Does it work for different kinds of readers? Like, is it too academic for a general reader or too basic for a legal scholar?
That's actually one of its real strengths, I think. He manages to bridge that gap remarkably well. There's enough depth, enough nuanced historical and legal argument to seriously engage specialists. But it's also written clearly enough and structured well enough to provide essential context and understanding for engaged citizens or students who just want to grasp how this crucial part of government is supposed to function.
That's quite an achievement. Does he address the potential downsides, though? I mean, encouraging Congress to be more assertive sounds good, but couldn't these powers be misused, especially the hard powers?
He absolutely does address that. He's careful to point out the ethical considerations. He acknowledges that these tools, particularly things like the contempt power or even aggressive spending power usage, have immense destructive potential if they're wielded carelessly or purely for partisan warfare.
So it's not just a cheerleader for congressional power.
Not at all. It's more a call for responsible assertion. He warns against misuse, but argues that the answer isn't non-use. It's effective principle deployment, ideally with greater public awareness and transparency about how and why Congress is choosing to act or not act.
Interesting. So it really comes back to that initial question. He lands firmly on the side of Congress has the power, but it's lying dormant, waiting for the political will. It's a choice.
It is indeed. And that leaves us, and you the listener, with a really interesting thought to ponder based on his analysis. If Congress's weakness truly is a matter of choice rather than design, and if it decided to become more assertive tomorrow, what single soft power tool do you think would have the biggest immediate impact? Would it be reforming internal discipline, changing the filibuster rules, something else entirely?
Focusing on the internal levers versus the big external confrontations. That's a great question to think about.
What could they change internally that would make the biggest difference externally?
Lots to consider there. For more on this book, click the link on screen for the in-depth book summary. And please subscribe, share, consider purchasing via the link, and always think rationally.
And don't forget to see the many genre-based book analyses at Mindful Moments. Subscribe and nourish your mind on the go.